Thank you very much, Sarah. Like Dominic Grieve, I try to be optimistic. I think, like Monty Python, I try to look on the bright side of life. And as a lifelong Spurs fan, alas, that comes necessarily with the territory. As regards this afternoon's topic, which is that Brexit will leave deep scars on the UK landscape as well as on that of the European Union, I'm convinced that the European Union will muddle through in a world in which intelligent muddling offers a better future than ignorant certitude. I'm satisfied that the much battered European centre can hold, that its imperfect compromises will ultimately prove more convincing than the fool's paradise of populism. Whether the UK itself can get a grip again and maintain the close relationship which it needs with Europe is less certain, but in its own hands. I believe that the transformation of British-Irish relations based on our work together in the European Union and on Northern Ireland, the two great peace processes of modern history, will survive. I'm also confident that the death of experts has, to borrow Mark Twain's phrase, been greatly exaggerated, and that rational debate such as that promoted here at MacGill Summer School will remain important, that glenties rather than glitziness will ultimately shape the road ahead. However, I don't propose to suggest that the uncharted waters ahead will be plain sailing for any of us. On the contrary, Brexit poses real difficulties, both for the UK and the European Union. Ireland's relationship with the former and its membership of the latter necessarily mean that we will be impacted too. So in addressing the two topics we've been asked to address, namely the UK and the European Union, I will therefore also touch in each case on the potential damage to Ireland. If Brexit goes ahead, it is the UK itself which will face the greatest difficulties. 3 years after the referendum, the UK still hasn't made up its mind what form Brexit should take, or indeed whether it should go ahead at all. In 2016, the advocates of Brexit chose not to offer the British public the glimmer of an inkling of what leaving the European Union would actually mean. Today's mantra that the British people knew what they were voting for is based on the preposterous fiction that the snake oil flogged by Farage to Joe Public was what Joe Public really wanted all along, and that Johnson's illusionist disappearing cake trick was honest politics. However, we do know, in the words of the Peter Sarset song, that Brexit Britain will bear the scars deep inside, and that the harder the Brexit, the deeper the scars. Like most Irish people, I truly wish our neighbouring island well. Concern for our British friends is what more than anything drives my own passion to contribute to the Brexit debate. But we must be honest, for that is what friendship requires. Economically, a UK which significantly detaches itself from its neighbourhood and its closest friends will without question be significantly poorer. In terms of influence, a more insular UK will have significantly diminished capacity to promote its interests long into the future and possibly forever. The notion of going global is meaningless. Through the European Union, the UK already has more favourable trading arrangements around the globe than it will ever be able to negotiate for itself. Psychologically, Britain has become a significantly less confident nation than it was, say, when it organised the magnificent 2012 Olympics, which I had the pleasure of being in London for. The Brexiteer aspiration to a fictional world order of the past reflects a supreme lack of confidence in Britain's ability to hold its own in today's real world of multilateral negotiation and compromise. The British mood will also darken as many people on both sides become more resentful, as the promised sunny Brexit uplands remain resolutely chilly and overcast. Many will seek to blame others for the inevitable consequences of their own choices. Between the four nations of the UK, the tectonic plates have already shifted considerably. The UK, to which many Brexiteers pay pious lip service, will be less united, possibly even to the point of fracture. British society for the foreseeable future will be deeply divided. It will have many fault lines, including those based on age, education and geography. Some families have drifted apart, many friendships have been lost, and around many dinner tables, the biggest issue faced by the country for half a century is often a no-go area of embarrassed silence or worse. The aim of Boris Johnson and others to unite the British people will gain no traction as long as half the population continue to be excluded from their definition of the people. Perhaps the greatest problem the UK faces is the rejection of expertise, which has contributed to the infantile nature of much British public debate and to the rise of xenophobic populism. For how can things improve if assertive horseshit is as valued as rational thought? Can these scars be healed? Much will depend on the terms on which the UK departs the European Union. If it leaves on friendly and rational terms, the wounds will take a while to heal and nothing will ever be quite the same, but some of the scars will probably start to show improvement before too long. If the UK leaves without a deal, it's difficult to see how the scars will heal. I say this all out of a deep affection for Britain, which has played a large part in my education and in my friendships. It's a country with immensely talented, resourceful and decent people. I hope that its society will gradually rediscover its cohesion, that its external friendships will be rebuilt. At the heart of that endeavour, if it is to succeed, must be a very simple aim, namely to re-engage with the truth, which has been comprehensively traduced by populist rhetoric. Of course, there is a way for the UK to come out strongly, even if Brexit goes ahead. That would be to rejoin the European Union once the poison has worked its way through the system. I believe that that is possible within a generation. It's where Britain's interests manifestly lie, and a new British generation, which voted overwhelmingly against Brexit, will increasingly be calling the shots. Developments in the UK will also leave scars on the British-Irish relationship. No country can escape the reality of its neighbourhood. Just as the UK can never escape its natural centre of gravity in Europe, so Ireland, although further strengthened in our commitment to the EU by witnessing the madness of Brexit, will always feel a strong pull of culture and language, of history and psychology, of family and friendship towards our nearest neighbour. What happens to the UK will always matter to us. However, if Brexit goes ahead, our two countries, despite the gravitational pull between us, will be set on quite different trajectories. The interests our countries pursue will increasingly diverge. Where our interests overlap, we will pursue them on different chessboards. Our politicians and officials will no longer regularly sit around the same table, exchange confidences in the same corridors, discuss tactics over the same coffees. Already many Irish and British people have different understandings of the world. Ireland wants to stay in the European Union for the very same reasons that many British voters opted to leave. Not all, of course. For Ireland, sovereignty, independence, going global and taking control are precisely about staying in the EU, not about leaving it. The mental geography of our peoples is increasingly traced on different maps. Brexit has thrown up a particular problem in relation to Northern Ireland, which has the potential to run much deeper than the backstop. Of course, the Irish and British governments will continue to take very seriously their joint responsibility for building peace on this island. But the EU provided not only important practical support for Northern Ireland, it also provided the context in which stark definitions of identity could be softened, in which common ground could be found, and in which a shared future could, small step by small step, replace a divided past. Some Unionists perhaps saw Brexit as an opportunity to yank the duvet over to their side of the constitutional bed. What has so angered those Unionists is that the EU has insisted on maintaining the border duvet precisely where it was. Unfortunately for all of us, the bedclothes are now pretty rumpled and uncomfortable. I have a particular concern about the effect the British decision to diverge from our shared path is likely to have on the nature of personal relationships between politicians and officials from our two countries. Relationships which for decades lubricated the friendship between our islands. I'm satisfied that existing friendships can broadly remain strong. What I'm concerned about are rather friendships in a post-Brexit generation, in which the shared assumptions and perceptions will no longer exist and may sometimes be in conflict. Through the years of our shared membership, we British and Irish developed an ease, depth and honesty of communication which had few, if any, parallels. In the future, we are likely to be faced with a choice in our relationship between, on the one hand, continuing to be frank and thus risk offence, or on the other hand, biting our tongues and not saying what is on our minds. Either way, something is set to be lost in the relationship. Personally, I favour frankness, as I know many of my British friends would, but frankness carries its risks and its downside. Can we then be optimistic about the evolution of the British-Irish relationship? On that, I believe that the glass is more than half full. The Queen's State visit, arguably the greatest international symbol of reconciliation in modern times, set the seal on the remarkable transformation of a relationship which had known so much enmity over the centuries. I don't believe that the advances made, even if things are going through a sticky patch, will be dissipated. We will continue to share profound values, important trade interests, as well as joint responsibilities on this island. But we need to recognise that Brexit will change the relationship significantly, not just because of what Brexit is, but because of the mentality which lies behind it. We will all have to work to avoid slipping into any of the old ways. One problem which was mentioned this morning is that the level of mutual knowledge between our countries is not in balance. Knowledge of Ireland across the water tends to be rudimentary, which is not surprising for a small island beside a large island. In some limited quarters, there has even been a return to condescension, entirely alien to the spirit of the Queen's visit, which we all thought had been consigned to the past. Talk of tails wagging dogs, or even offers of money, here's something for yourself, to address Ireland's serious concerns on the backstop are sad to see and certainly counterproductive. And we in this island must also be careful of our rhetoric. Brexit will also, of course, pose serious challenges for the EU as a whole and will inflict some scars on Brussels and across the continent, and that is the second issue that I want to address briefly this afternoon. Most Europeans are bemused, but also very sad, that a valued and admired partner decided on a particular day in 2016 and in a particular set of circumstances to leave a common enterprise which it had done so much to shape. That in itself constitutes a significant scar both on Europe's relationship with Britain and on the European project. The EU will, in practical terms, be weaker for the departure of our British friends. The EU's influence in trade and politics is a factor of size as well as of intelligent strategy. The UK's departure will also reduce somewhat Europe's impact and coherence in the promotion of its values in the wider world, including human rights and the rule of law. It is a blow to the multilateralism which lies at the heart of the European Union and on which the world so much depends. The EU will not, however, shrink from its responsibilities. It will redouble its efforts to consolidate peace and prosperity on our continent. It will steadfastly honour the memory of those who died in the two great wars of the last century, both by its nature and by its actions. The European Union regrets that the UK is set to cut itself off from the mainstream of that great project, but it will strain every sinew, short of undermining its basic principles, to develop an effective relationship with the UK in support of values which most British people continue to share. With Brexit, the European Union will be losing a member state which has done as much as any to influence the European project. That will also leave a scar. The UK has been the most influential driving force for two of the EU's greatest pillars, the single market and enlargement. The tragic irony is that the only people who have no idea of the scale of British influence in Europe are in Britain itself. I have heard Brexiteers spouting nonsense about the French telling us what to do in Europe. As an EU without the UK continues to shape the legislation and regulatory standards which will affect British business, France will be delighted to find, at last, that it has far more scope to tell the UK what to do than was ever possible when the UK was sitting around the table and significantly influencing every decision. The departure of the UK will also upset an important balance which has evolved in the decision-making process of the European Union. The Franco-German motor exercises great influence in Europe, but not because France and Germany agree with each other and gang up on the others. Rather, their shared influence stems from the fact that they so often disagree from different ends of a policy spectrum. When those two countries manage to reach a joint position, their hard-won agreement often reflects a landing ground in which all member states can feel comfortable. Over many decades, the UK painstakingly, often brilliantly, worked its way into a position of central influence, so that emerging compromises usually reflected also a traditional British pragmatism and common sense to the benefit of the European Union as a whole. Will then a European Union without the UK be able to cope with these new challenges? I have little doubt that it will, for three reasons. First, because the departure of the UK has strengthened rather than weakened Europe's resolve. The opportunity to observe the British March of Folly and the effect it is having on the prosperity and coherence of British society and on its international influence, and I say that with sadness, has strengthened popular support for the EU elsewhere and has added welcome urgency to necessary European decisions. Second, the European Union will come through strongly because of its genius for adaptation. A union which would grow from 6 to 28 countries, scarcely blinking an eyelid, will be able to cope with going down to 27. Indeed, we will be able in due course to grow again to accommodate other European countries which are understandably enthusiastic to join. And third, the EU will continue to thrive and to evolve simply because it has no choice. In a world of persisting totalitarianism, growing populism, and relentless assaults on the very nature of truth, the European Union and its respectful, complex institutions, with all their imperfections, offer the best answer for managing relations between democratic nations. Finally, then, what about the impact of Brexit on Ireland's relationship with Europe? On the positive side, that relationship is now stronger and deeper than ever, not least because of the immense support we have received from our European partners and from the European institutions on Brexit. Moreover, the fact that Ireland is almost entirely unaffected by the Brexit virus — I don't mean unaffected by Brexit, but the thinking that lies behind Brexit — despite the pervasiveness of British media in Ireland, represent, in my view, the most significant assertion of our psychological independence since the foundation of the state. Our relationship with Britain no longer defines our role in the world. Europe is increasingly celebrated as the essential context for Ireland, in Robert Emmet's words, taking its place among the nations of the earth. But there will also be very significant challenges for Ireland and Europe after Britain's departure. The notion of Irish dependence on the UK in EU negotiations has been vastly exaggerated. We've always disagreed with the UK on some key European issues, and we've always formed alliances right across the continent. But on a significant number of issues, it has been important for Ireland to have the UK on our side. Examples that spring to mind include tax competitiveness and justice and home affairs issues. These are some of the areas in which we will in future have to provide more intellectual leadership and to develop wider and deeper alliances. Work on this has already started. Let me leave you with a thought about a challenge which has not been sufficiently addressed, but which in my view is probably our greatest European challenge in Ireland. There is no doubt that the Irish government has handled Brexit well, and that our opposition parties have demonstrated a commendable willingness to put national interest ahead of party politics. However, by far our biggest, most enduring European challenge lies beyond Brexit. Namely, how can we best protect and promote Irish interests in an evolving European Union? The exercise of influence in the EU is a constant process, not a fact of life. It is a challenge which will be more difficult for us after Brexit. It may well be that Irish governments of whatever complexion will adequately resource and prioritise EU policy into the future as they have Brexit. However, I wouldn't bet on it. It will not happen automatically or without significant political leadership. There is a profound risk that Irish interests in the EU, camouflaged as they now are by the unavoidable centrality of Brexit, will fall down the Irish political agenda again to where they have traditionally languished, comfortably below the daily political radar until the next crisis comes along. We could well return to the traditional Irish sports of punching above our weight and flying by the seat of our pants. It would be the gravest of mistakes. Thank you very much.